We'll make a start. So welcome. It's great to see so many of you here this morning. We've got a great turnout despite the cold, snowy April morning weather, which is just dreadful. So I'm going to start off by just informing you about some housekeeping. So we're not expecting any fire alarms today, but if you do hear the alarm, we'll need to make our way through the nearest fire exits. We've got 2 here, and we'll be given instructions of where to go. Toilets are situated past the main reception area, and there's a cloakroom where you can hang your coats and umbrellas. And just a reminder, for those who've parked in Times Square car park, please take your ticket to the reception area during the course of the day, and one of the member of staff will validate it for you. So, my name is Helen Atkinson. I am the Involvement and Engagement Manager for the National Institute for Health Research, Clinical Research Network, North East North Cumbria. A nice short job title. And it's fantastic, as I say, to see so many of you here today. We are going to be live streaming the event, which means that people can watch it from home, which is great. So hello, anybody who's watching it from home. And the talks will also be recorded so that you can watch them at a later date. We're also, for those on Twitter, we'd love you to join the conversation, and our hashtag is ResearchNENC. So please get tweeting. So this is the first event of its kind, and it's been designed in partnership with patients, clinical staff, and colleagues from the NIHR Clinical Research Network North East North Cumbria, which aims to make the North East North Cumbria the best place to take part in health and social care research. Back in October, we formed a steering group of patients who helped us to design the title, the content, the programme, the venue, the timings of the day. So we really hope that you find the day interesting. And I'm really delighted to be joined on stage by Victoria Bartle, who's one of our patient representatives and who's been really instrumental in shaping the event. So welcome, Victoria. So we wanted to design an event that really highlights the current research that's taking place in fatigue across the region, and also to highlight that it's a really complex area that affects many different conditions and also impacts on many different people. We also want to look into the future and look at how we can design future research studies, and we'll be doing more of this in the workshops this afternoon. As part of the event, we also wanted to provide information and support on the resources that are available to help people living with fatigue across the region. And I'm delighted that we've got some fantastic exhibitors around the room and which you'll be able to visit over the lunch break. So thank you to the exhibitors for also taking part today. We're also joined by Dr. Juliet Chinnery-Robson, who's an artist, who's done a fantastic collection of ME fatigue artwork. So please also take a visit during the lunch break. And now I'm going to hand it over to Victoria.
Thank you. Hi, as Helen said, my name's Victoria Bartle. I was asked to be one of the patient representatives involved in the planning of this event through my work with Voice North. They've got one of the booths somewhere, so you can have a look and see more about what we do there later on. And I'm also going to be giving you a patient's view of living with fatigue later on today. You've got the agenda on the back of your name tag there, so you can see who's talking and what we're doing. And I was so excited to be part of this event because I know developing research into fatigue is absolutely vital to treat so many different conditions. And today you'll get to hear from speakers with a wide range of backgrounds who are all focused on fatigue research. I hope that you all get a lot out of the talks and that in the workshops we can give the researchers loads of ideas and support into what it is that we all believe that they need to be focusing on in order to help us live with, treat, and eventually cure chronic fatigue. So just a heads up for the healthy ones among you, I and possibly others will be wiggling about, getting up and down and stretching all day because it helps with my pain, so just ignore me. And if you want to do the same, then feel free. So thank you so much for coming, have a great day, and thanks for being involved. The first speaker that we have today is Professor Fye, who's one of the professors of rheumatology at University. So Fye, if you want to come and give us your fatigue research update, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Victoria, and thank you for all of you who are here today. And I have an apology to make. I can't actually stay after the end of my talk. Unfortunately, I need to go somewhere to another meeting. Actually, to your delight, it will be something to do with fatigue research, some collaboration that I have in America. But I'm also going to miss all the excellent program for the rest of the day, and also some of the excellent discussion. But I'm sure that I can catch up with Helen later on to find out what's happening. But thank you first of all. Now, what I'm going to show you today is just share with you some of the things that we have been working on fatigue. I think for the first slide is really, I think many of you know a lot better than I do. But I think certainly, I'm just highlighting some of the challenges and that I think and also shape the research priority that my group are looking at. So first of all, I'm sure you agree that chronic fatigue is a key contributing factor to our well-being, and also certainly significant impact on both direct and indirect health costs. But one of our problems, and in fact in research on fatigue, is that we currently don't really have a very good and reliable and accurate way of measuring fatigue, because the word fatigue that people use may mean different things. How we describe the severity may be different from one individual to the other. And in most of the research, as you know, we are often comparing different groups and different people. And of course, if people don't use the same standard, then it's very difficult to actually make any comparison. And therefore, that's why research often becomes very difficult. So until we have those methods, it does make a challenge to doing good fatigue research. But I won't be talking about that, although this is something that we're also looking at the moment. Now, and for the same reason, so although many drug companies and in fact the wholesale service are actually interested in developing therapy and helping people with fatigue, but they do find that just purely based on questionnaire-based, which is currently the only way that we can assess research, can be unreliable and also have its problem. And that's why there's always a little bit of reluctance about company and other people developing treatment for that, because they really don't know if they develop something would it actually get approved. And also, of course, at the moment there really isn't any effective treatment. Otherwise, I'm sure we'll be all dishing it out very easily. And then finally, I think there's also some potential confounding factor, because many of the patients, because of the fatigue, they may also have other symptoms, and sometimes it's difficult to really work out exactly the relationship between those, because we often don't know what happened when they were healthy. We only see them when they became ill. So what happened before that, when they were better, is often unclear. Okay. Now, but so these are the research areas that's what I've been focusing on. And I'm a rheumatologist by background, and I mostly see patients with Sjogren's syndrome now. So although I do see some other condition now and again, but mostly on Sjogren now. So we have established a big database, including biobank sample. So we've been really trying to work out whether there's any subtype of fatigue, because I believe from seeing many patients with the symptom, I think there may be more than just one type of fatigue. Now, I may be wrong, but at least this is an area that I'm trying to look at. I mentioned that I'm interested in finding a better way to measure fatigue, and I won't go into that, but that is an ongoing project. I think it's also very important to actually able to demonstrate to the health service that how much impact really patient with fatigue is. There's a lot of paper, but actually I don't think we've got enough concrete evidence to really illustrate to the funder how important it is. I think people are listening now, but I think they still need some additional work on that. And I think, of course, to some extent, we do know that some of the fatigue would be something affected in the CNS, central nervous system. So we do think that actually in the neuroimaging may potentially a good way of actually going into that area of fatigue. And finally, I'm very interested in understanding actually what causing fatigue, which is what the rest of the talk is going to focus on. Now, one of the first things that I did when I first joined Newcastle was actually to try to find, can we actually find any measurable markers in the blood that we can actually all in common in patient with fatigue? Because if there is, it actually gives us a clue about where else we can go and look for the mechanism of fatigue. So at the time, I'm focusing on immunology because actually my PhD was all in very basic immunology. So I'm thinking, could the immune system play a role in fatigue? Because also, of course, a lot of the rheumatic condition that we look after is because the immune system is not functioning correctly. So the hypothesis, in other words, the assumption that I'm making is that there would be some abnormal pattern of biological changes that we can measure in the blood. And these are focusing, as I said initially, on the immune-related pathways. Now, so we look at this using two approaches, but I'm going to first of all going through the one that we look at the protein in the blood, and then secondly, going back later on to look at what happened in a genetic level. Now, so I'm wanting to introduce to you about this theory that often talk about is one of the causes of fatigue. So this is something called sickness behavior. You recognize a lady with a cold and a man with flu. So they're all clearly very fatigued, and you know which one have more fatigue than the other. Now, so of course, so this, we all have bad flu, so we know that the kind of symptom we would experience. We feel weak, we feel tired, we feel a bit low, and we find it difficult to concentrate. In fact, that's actually the constellation of symptoms. It's not dissimilar to many patients describing to us. So we know that by studying animals, this is purely due to certain inflammatory cytokine response in response to infection, which is of course the mechanism for the immune system to fight against the infection to lead to recovery from the infection. So therefore, initially we thought, oh, maybe that is the case because, of course, in Sjögren is the immune system attacking our own body, and therefore the immune system are abnormally activated. So maybe because of that, that's causing fatigue. So what we were expecting to see would be the higher level of inflammation in the blood, then these people would have more fatigue. But actually, what we observe is completely the opposite. So in here, the green bar is actually the healthy people. The solid horizontal line are the average, the mean cytokine level. Of course, there are a lot of individual variation. Now, of course, as a group, patients with Sjögren do have higher level of inflammatory cytokine, which is as expected. Now, do notice the scale on the vertical axis are log scale, so they're 10 times different. So small changes is actually quite a significant difference. But actually, the more fatigue the patient has, paradoxically, they have a slightly lower level of inflammation, even though they're still higher than healthy control. So it's not that there's no inflammation, it's just that the level of inflammation is not as high as those who don't have fatigue in patients with Sjögren. Now, and then what we did is that we think, oh, but there may be other factors that influence the inflammatory cytokine level, because of course they are different individuals, they have other symptoms, they have many other things. So we often, in this case, what we do is to put in all the available data into a model and to see whether they may be interacting with each other. So these are just statistical mean. We call them regression to see whether we can find what are the key factors that really link with the level of fatigue. And so what we did is that we put in all the data into the system, and we find that actually the system worked quite well. So the horizontal line is actually what we observed, how patients reported how fatigued they are. This is how we predicted them. So if it is a perfect model, all the dots should lie across the diagonal line. So i.e. if they think they have mild fatigue, the observed will be exactly the same. If they have slightly more, the observed will be exactly the same. So although it's not perfect, you can see that actually the prediction model, when we put in all the parameters, worked quite well. And then we start to take away some of the parameters to see how well the model still work. And actually what we can do, we can come down to just having one four factor. So if you put in the level of pain they have, how much depression symptom they have. Now, I'm not saying these people are depressed, it's just how much symptoms of depression they have. And 2 inflammatory cytokine level, we can almost completely replicate the prediction model as good as if you put in all the data. And these are the work that's done by one of the clinical fellow, Nadia, in the group. Now, so what we actually think might happen, this animation completely gone wrong, sorry about that. I will explain what it is then. So what we think is actually whenever it's happened, so something that's stressing the immune system would obviously respond and causing inflammation. That's actually the cause of a lot of the immune-mediated condition. And this immune-mediated condition at the beginning would be directly driving symptoms such as fatigue, depression, and pain. But of course, if the inflammation carry on, the body would try to restore the homeostasis. And therefore, you will develop some kind of regulatory mechanism in order to restore the balance. That's just the normal body. We normally try to restore some level of balance, isn't it? And then what happened is that if some of these inflammatory, I might as well get the whole thing off because it's clearly completely affected it. So this is a problem, Apple and PC, I think. So what happened is that if this immune regulatory mechanism is not functioning properly, it may then actually affecting allowing the depression and fatigue to be continued. And of course, I do believe that the fatigue, pain, and depression all interact with each other as well. So this is the kind of model that we're currently working on. Now, so exactly what can potentially also modify fatigue? There's a lot of different theory has been proposed in the literature. So things like the hypopituitary adrenal axis, I'll come on to that a little bit later, the circadian rhythm, sleep problem, depression, anxiety, and loads of things has been postulated to actually potentially influence fatigue. So the question is, how can we actually start to work out what's going on with all these complex systems? So first of all, we just thought we just had to do one system at a time because that's the easiest to unpick the whole thing. So the first thing one of the things that we look at, could it be something to do with the neuroendocrine axis? For example, what we call the HPA axis, which is stands for hypothalamus, which is a gland in our brain, and an anterior pituitary, which controls loads of hormone, but most importantly, one of the hormone being the adrenal gland, which produces the cortisol, which is, of course, many of you may have cortisol injection in your bum or elsewhere. And these actually have a powerful suppression regulatory mechanism to many of the inflammatory cytokines, which also then feed back into the whole feedback loop. And the whole hypothalamus is actually is a brain center in response to all kind of stress. So this is really a stress response mechanism. So we know that some of these abnormality has been proposed to be associated with fatigue. It may be because there may be some enhanced corticosteroid feedback. It could be the basal level of the cortisol is a little bit low. There may be different abnormality in the diurnal or circadian rhythm. And also maybe the whole system just slightly reduced in response to challenge. In fact, this is one of the things that we've been looking at by one of the master student, Megan, here. And you can see that the patient, this time we're looking at a patient with chronic fatigue syndrome, and then you can see that there are clearly differences in terms of patient with CFS and the patient with control. So we do think that that potentially be one of the mechanisms. Although actually when we try to replicate this work in Sherman, actually there's not much significant difference. So maybe suggesting that in fact, although people are fatigued and may be in different conditions, the mechanism may be slightly different. Now, another area that we think are interesting is actually the autonomic nervous system, because of course the autonomic nervous system is what controls the fight, flight, and flight response. So again, it's a powerful mechanism in terms of dealing with external stress onto the body. So of course there has been a lot of observation to show that the autonomic nervous system may be abnormal in patients with fatigue. A lot of the work done by my colleague Julia Newton. And so these are the things that are listed on the slide here. I won't go through exactly what these tests or measurements are. Now, so we carry on with this thought. So what we've been doing is the work mostly done by Jessica, who is a postdoc in the lab. So what we did is that we used a device which is called a gamma core device, which is actually directly stimulating the vagus nerve using just by stimulating over the neck. I've got a picture here. So this is what you can do, and then we can see if we do actually stimulate the vagus nerve, what happened to both the underlying inflammatory response and also the level of fatigue. What we're quite surprised is that you can see that patient using this device, they can actually, their fatigue level significantly reduced over a period of days and weeks. And also actually some of the sleeping score also reduced as well. This is the daytime sleepiness score. And also, interestingly, when we do actually measure the blood in the cytokine production in response to stimulation, you can see that their level also reduced. So in other words, we can also suppress some of the inflammation. So we are currently now extending the study to patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and rheumatoid arthritis. And we also just recently completed a study including a sham device as well. But I'm not going to show you because that hasn't been published. Now, and then the other thing that I come back to, I mentioned about the gene may be potentially relevant. So when we talk about gene, We can talk about the basic genetic makeup, so everyone would have slightly different genetic makeup unless you're identical twin. And or you can have a methylation that, broadly speaking, we call them epigenetic, i.e. this would be there's a semi-permanent changes in the control of the gene expression. So these are acquired, but can potentially pass on to down the generation, but it's not the actual genetic makeup. And of course, the actual gene level expression that could be is much more mobile rather than fixed. So this is one of the things that we look at when we did the fingerprint for fatigue earlier. So this work is largely done by Catherine. Now, so what we did is actually we measure the expression level of the gene, of all the gene in the whole body. So what normally we would expect, we have about 22,000 genes in the body. So what we expect, just purely by chance, we should see some genes that are abnormal, difference between those people who've got fatigue and non-fatigue. Those are highlighted in the blue dot here. These are just purely by chance. But actually, surprisingly, in our actual study, what we find is that there's absolutely no genes that we can identify that were difference between patient who got fatigue and non-fatigue. So initially, we were really shocked. We just think there's something wrong either with the analysis. But actually, when we're thinking about it, this is actually not surprising, because if there's a single gene that really affecting people who got fatigue or non-fatigue, we would have found the answer of fatigue quite a long time ago. It wouldn't take that long. So what we think is actually, because genes never really work in isolation, of course the whole body is actually a network. So genes interact with each other and of course link with each other. So actually we don't need some big changes to a single gene to actually cause some problem. What we may need is actually a series of small changes in each of the genes. If they're all along the same pathway, then we may actually effect some big changes. Do you see what I mean? So it's a little bit like, the next slide. So, you can have a big, massive light bulb, but you can also have many small little light bulbs. You probably, have the same level of illumination in the room. So therefore, when we try to look at the data, not in isolated single gene, we're actually looking at pathway. We do actually find some pathway that were different between those patients who got fatigue and non-fatigue. But actually, surprisingly, perhaps also in accordance to our protein data, is that a lot of these pathways are not overtly immune-mediated or inflammation-related. So also supporting our previous observation is not the direct inflammation that causes fatigue in patients who have chronic conditions. So currently, we are also looking at sleep in fatigue, but I'm not going to show you any data because this is work in progress. We're also starting to get some funding for looking at some neuroimaging data. And so to end on the talk, I just wanting to just show you about now what we're thinking. This is the earlier physiological model that we're talking about, but with the additional data, now we're thinking about we need to including also the HPA, although in the Sherwin we may not, but all for fatigue model maybe we should. We need to think about including the autonomic nervous system. We need to think about including the sleep in the model. Now this arrow is going to be getting more complex. We are still at the moment trying to work out how do we construct the model, because that is important, because one of the major work that we are now doing is that we know that this is not a simple problem. We really need to think it about as a whole. So it is likely to be a complex model. So what we're increasingly needing is some kind of way of dealing with all the data in totality. So we often use a technique such as mathematical modeling, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So we just need to construct a model. So in this case, of course, it's fatigue. Once we constructed the model, we can turn it into a mathematical model. We can then actually simulate the model to see what are the changes we will be expecting. So we've got a prediction, and we can go back to see how well it fits into that. So this would be one of the work that we are now driving a lot, because we have now collected a lot of data, and hopefully that will give us some better answer to understanding fatigue. So thank you for listening, and I hope you haven't dropped off to sleep yet. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we've got Dr. Kate Hackett, who is the Associate Professor of Occupational Health Therapy at Northumbria University and Specialist Occupational Therapist, Newcastle-upon-Tyne NHS Foundation Trust. She has the longest title, but she's going to talk to you today about the Crest of Fatigue Clinic approach. So I'll pass you over to Kate now.
Hello there, thank you very much for having me. So yes, I work at Northumbria University. So most of the time I'm working with occupational therapy students over there and also doing some research. But I'm also a specialist occupational therapist over at the Cresta Fatigue Clinic, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I don't actually know how the pressing. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk to you about the Cresta Fatigue Clinic. So Cresta stands for Clinics in Research and Themed Assessments. So it's a clinical setting, and we see patients who have chronic fatigue regardless of their physical health diagnosis. And first of all, I just wanted to ask the question, is there a need for such a clinic? Well, actually, fatigue is the primary or secondary reason for actually a quarter of GP appointments, which is quite significant, as you can imagine. I'm really struggling to get my... Right, okay. And if you look on Google and start typing the words in, why am I, the first search that actually comes up, so if you actually literally type the words, why am I, in Google, the first suggested search that comes up is always tired. It's a huge problem to many people. It's a huge problem to society, actually. But if we look at chronic conditions such as rheumatic diseases, up to 70% of patients with things like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and fibromyalgia experience fatigue. And up to 25% of long-term cancer survivors. So these are people whose cancer has been successfully treated, but they're still struggling with the symptom of fatigue in the long term. It affects many people with neurological conditions such as multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and then we see in conditions like joint hypermobility, spectrum disorders, and conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, fatigue is a huge, huge problem. It also affects people that have diseases of the autonomic nervous system, such as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and of course conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, ME. And there are many, many more conditions that I haven't mentioned, and if I haven't mentioned your condition, I apologise, but lots of autoimmune diseases, liver diseases, and things like that as well, kidney diseases as well. Fatigue is described as an overwhelming sense of tiredness, lack of energy, and feeling of exhaustion. That's just one description. I'm sure that many of you in the room can come up with many other descriptions. We've conducted focus groups with some of the patients that have come to our clinic, and also some of the patients that attend Phi's clinic, who you've just heard speak. And these are some of the things that people say, that this is how they describe their fatigue. It's overwhelming at times. I can't do the things that I used to do. It really impacts on people's ability to perform just everyday activities that many other people take for granted. Sometimes you force yourself to do things and then you suffer for it afterwards. So actually pushing yourself to go on to start an activity and finish it can have huge consequences and knock into the next day, the following day, etc., etc. And what a lot of people were saying as well, that they put an enormous amount of energy into not looking fatigued and presenting themselves looking really well to other people, but so that you put the face on and you get sick and tired of wearing the mask. So that in itself can almost become problematic, because people see you as looking well when you're not feeling well at all. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about our clinic and why it was established. So it was set up in 2013 by Professor Julia Newton, and her and Dr. Gavin Spickett had done a clinical audit of the North of Tyne Chronic Fatigue Syndrome service back in 2010, and found that 50% of the patients that were referred into that service for us to see if they had chronic fatigue syndrome or ME actually didn't meet the diagnostic criteria for ME, and that was because they had other conditions that were associated with fatigue, so they didn't fit that diagnosis. But unfortunately, there was nowhere for those patients to go to get support with the fatigue. So that's why the clinic was set up. So it was set up to meet this unmet need. So we do see patients with long-term physical health conditions that also experience fatigue. And we offer assessment and multidisciplinary therapy interventions for patients. And it's the first of its kind in the UK NHS. And we're represented by Julia, who's the medical, we've got nursing staff, physiotherapy, and Vicky's in the room, myself in occupational therapy, and Vincent Deary is the health psychologist. So because this was a brand new clinic and we'd set it up how we thought it should be, we weren't actually sure that we were doing, we weren't actually sure that people were happy with the service and that we were meeting people's needs. So we conducted a mixed method service evaluation very early on, and what people were saying, so these were things that were really important to patients attending the clinic, and they were also things that we were doing well, and they were kind of things that you would almost take for granted. You know, take my fatigue seriously. Of course we take people's fatigue seriously and believe in people's symptoms, but what we found was that a lot of patients had been around revolving doors and had their fatigue, you know, other health professionals perhaps hadn't seen it as being so important and even had their symptoms dismissed. So people had really bad experiences, and actually to come to a clinic such as ours where it was just as a given, of course we believe you and, you know, we'll do what we can to help you, that was a really good thing for a lot of patients. And they also wanted to know that we were investigating potential causes for their fatigue and offering treatments for them, which we do. So we published that in Health Expectations a few years ago. So this is the referral pathway. So patients are referred from their primary care clinician to the clinic, where they will receive an assessment from the consultant physician, who may see them for a few appointments and then discharge them. It's very individualised, and it depends on people's individual needs. Or they might come through and see myself or other members of the multidisciplinary team and then discharge back to the GP again. We have changed this pathway slightly in recent years because we were getting a lot of referrals from rheumatology, actually from Phi, who was talking to you previously. And because he's already done an assessment with patients, so he's a physician himself, they came directly, those patients from rheumatology actually come direct to me now. And then as appropriate, they may see other members of the team or be discharged. As I say, it's very individualised. So what we do at initial assessment when people first come to the clinic, we consider all their comorbidities and also consider what medications people are on that might also be associated with drowsiness. If people are so we also consider the autonomic nervous system and if that's being affected in any way, because it is in a lot of fatigue patients. So if people are symptomatic, so for example if they feel dizzy when they stand up, or if they're feeling unwell, if they've been standing for prolonged periods of time, we will do some objective measures of their autonomic nervous system, so look at the heart rate and blood pressure in response to gravity, and then offer appropriate symptom management accordingly, and that could be medical or it could be physiotherapy, and Vicky's written up about what we do within the clinic actually for that particular symptom. We ask people to complete a sleep diary, so we look at any problems with their sleep, and we ask people to fill in an activity diary as well, so we can look at what kind of activities they're doing during the course of a day and over a week, and when they're resting and when they're sleeping. And we also have compiled a patient education booklet, which is available online as well, so anyone can access that, but we often give that to people as well. I really like this booklet as well, and I use this a lot with people, and it's because it's got a really nice activity diary at the back. So I tend to use this activity diary, which people complete and then bring back to me. So that's also available online. Arthritis Research UK have published that. And we did a qualitative study a few years ago looking at the use of this booklet with people with rheumatic diseases. And actually, that booklet in itself, if it's given to people by a healthcare professional, was enough for them to start making changes to their behaviours which might affect their fatigue. So that was quite interesting to know. But of course, we offer a little bit more than a booklet in the clinic, and we work with people as well. Occupational therapy, so specifically these are the things that I'm interested in. It's people's activities of daily living, and I look at people's diaries and with them to kind of do a bit of an analysis of that with them. It's very collaborative. Work with people with sleep, so we offer cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia if appropriate, or we refer on to the sleep clinic. So if people are showing any signs or symptoms of perhaps a primary sleep disorder, we don't address that directly in clinic, but we refer on for further specialist assessment. We look at people's personal goals, and so these can be in different areas of people's lives, so self-care, so looking after themselves, productivity, that might be to do with work or things that people do around the home, or looking after other people, so they're things that you have to do in life, and then leisure and social activities, and actually see them all as equally important. Look at rest and relaxation, look at pacing activity, balancing different kinds of activities, and look at grading activity, incorporating people's personal stepped goals. And I also look at vocational rehabilitation with people as well, so it might be if people are struggling to get back into work or they're struggling to stay into work, there are things that we can do to support them. Physiotherapy. I hope I'm representing you well, Vicky, but Vicky does an initial assessment with people. She looks at if people's muscles are particularly deconditioned, and she really does address muscle imbalance, and particularly does a lot of work on core stability and core strength. She, as I've already mentioned, she does address postural dizziness as well, and has specially adapted exercises to support people with this. And it does take a graded, she takes a graded approach and sees people in a class setting, so that can be groups of individuals that come to a class or on a one-to-one basis. And we've just completed another evaluation within the clinic, and this time it was a Vicky's exercise class. And there were some key themes that came from that. And we asked people what they valued from the class, and really it was the exercises themselves, but it was also the group atmosphere, and it was having that support from other people that were also experiencing some similar problems, and having that peer support. There were some physical benefits that people gained from doing the exercises, and it was an environment where people felt they were able to kind of work out how to self-manage their symptoms, as well as working through issues like acceptance, which can be quite a difficult thing for many people. And it was an informal environment just to get some education about fatigue management strategies as well. And we're trying to publish that at the moment. And then my colleague Vincent Deary, he's a health psychologist, and he might see people on a one-to-one basis, and particularly if they're struggling with things like acceptance and just with living life with this condition, and having some struggling with it psychologically with that, which is totally understandable. So he uses a cognitive behavioural therapy approach, and also he uses acceptance and commitment therapy as well, and he can look at sleep as well. We have looked at some outcome data from patients that have been through the clinic to see if we're making a difference. So we've evaluated, actually this is a group of Sjogren's patients that have been through the clinic, and it was the first 53 patients that have been through the clinic, and we collected fatigue data at referral, when they were discharged from the clinic, and then we've got the longer term data as well, so 6 to 12 months after they've been through the clinic. So just to show you a data slide here. So the fatigue scores are the scores at the top, so in the first column of numbers at the top here, that's their average fatigue scores of the patients that have been through the clinic when they were referred in. So these did improve at discharge, and the improvements remained in the longer term as well. But I've got it on another slide here, which kind of, so these box plots here, each of these dots is an individual person's fatigue score. And in blue, that's what it was when they were referred, and in red, that was discharge, and in green, that was a follow-up. So you can see that the dots have moved down the graph somewhat. Not everybody improves, and I think that's important to bear in mind. You know, we don't see improvements in everybody, but some people did improve a lot, and some people improved a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to finish off there because we haven't got a lot of time, but really just to summarise, hopefully I've given you a little bit of a picture of what the fatigue clinic offers, and we offer evidence-based, individualised interventions for adults who've got chronic fatigue in association with a long-term health condition. And we do see improvements in fatigue scores in Sjogren's patients. We've demonstrated that who've been through the clinic. And what we're doing in the longer term, obviously, is seeing people in clinic and working with individual patients. But we also hope to develop and evaluate components of the interventions that we offer within the clinic, and also as the clinic intervention as a whole. So I would just like to acknowledge lots of people. So on the top we've got clinic staff, so we've got Julia Newton, Vincent Deary, Vicky Strassheim and Lynn, who's the sister in the clinic. And on the bottom here, this is rheumatology, who we've worked really closely with, so Fi, who you've just heard from, and Dennis Lundring, who's a statistician at the university as well. So thank you very much.
Good. The reason being, rheumatologists deal with a wide variety of patients. We don't have patients coming to us for chronic fatigue. They come to us with arthritis, muscle pain, fibromyalgia, and mixed in with that is tiredness and sleep problems and difficulty function. So I did a little experiment in the rheumatology clinic last month. This one, moved on. So, how do we tackle? Okay, moved on too much, I think. Yeah, how do you tackle tiredness in a very short appointment? So go to your GP, the appointment is 10 minutes. Come to me, my appointment is 15 minutes. For a new patient, we have a bit more time, half an hour. That's 15 minutes. Is it practical to manage tiredness within the 15-minute appointment, because we have everything else to cover as well? So this was a talk for doctors, my junior doctors, but hopefully it will help everybody here. So each appointment in my clinic is approximately 15 minutes. All the patients are known to me before, so there's no surprises there. And many patients had multiple medical problems and medications. So we need to discuss pain, arthritis, disability, medications, medication side effects, and blood results. Oh, don't forget tiredness. It's very easy to forget. And we only have 1 or 2 minutes in the end to address tiredness. If you start with tiredness at the beginning, it'll take over the full 15 minutes, give them time for the rest. And none of these patients are actually referred to us for chronic fatigue. Hence, there is no time for detailed work in this clinic. So how can we use the 15 minutes efficiently to acknowledge fatigue and address a few bullet points so that there's a plan of action afterwards? So I'll go through the experiment in the last 2 clinics when I did this work. So there were various diagnoses. Common diagnoses were rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndromes. Many people have 2 conditions, Crohn's disease and ankylosing spondylitis. Sjogren's syndrome with a new diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Somebody with rheumatoid arthritis had to have repeated hand surgery. Sjogren's, Graves' disease, thyroid deficiency, menopause, all of them can cause fatigue. Polymyalgia, iron deficiency. Despite the iron deficiency, this lady had too many red blood cells. Maybe had sleep apnea. Sjogren's syndrome. So somebody had very many problems which can cause fatigue. Low blood pressure, B12, iron, folic acid, vitamin D deficiency, thyroid deficiency, primary biliary cirrhosis. So we need to unpack which one of these is actually causing the fatigue or worsening fatigue at this moment. Fibromyalgia, where fatigue is a main component, rheumatoid arthritis, and there's a new vitamin B12 deficiency. And polymyalgia, where it's a condition with muscle pain and exhaustion after activity, improves usually with steroids, but when we know the steroids, the tiredness comes back. Somebody with rheumatoid arthritis who was well, but became more tired after stroke. I hadn't realized until that moment that stroke can cause tiredness. So psoriatic arthritis and iron deficiency anemia, somebody with rheumatoid arthritis with lupus, been better since this medication called hydroxychloroquine. Somebody who had psoriatic arthritis, which is actually well controlled, but they have tiredness with menopause-related night sweats and restlessness. So these are the 15 patients out of 30 in those two clinics where tiredness was uncovered either by myself or the person brought it up. So the main themes we uncovered in the clinic were, I'll go through the list. It's probably worth interesting to go through the list. Poor sleep, the early awakening. The mind goes around. You haven't slept till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then you force yourself to sleep, and then as a result you're sleeping during the daytime. And somebody else who had Crohn's disease, and the tiredness typically hits that person the week before the immunology treatment, the infusion for monoclonal antibodies for Crohn's disease. That was quite typical. A week before I know I need the infusion. Somebody who had weight gain, sudden onset of breathlessness, snoring very badly, and waking up gasping for breath. Somebody who had very, very poor sleep, mainly because of pain. Somebody who's quite sleepy despite being very active during the daytime. 10,000 steps a day, weight gain, having to nap each evening, but it doesn't help with this person also fasting intermittently, trying to take only 800 calories to try and lose weight. And dry eyes and dry mouth, the feeling of dryness itself is tiring. With Sjogren's syndrome, and Sjogren's syndrome itself causes other reasons why people are tired, with underefficient sleep and back pain. And another person with poor sleep, which is interrupted, but at least this person trying to get the sleep back under control by going back to the gym, trying to get a rhythm in life. Somebody who had tiredness which was unrelated to the rheumatology condition, we asked the person, what's happening? This is related to the medications. So we gave pregabalin for pain, which is helping pain and sleep, but it's making the person more dizzy. So they can't cope without the pregabalin, but it's causing some inner ear problems in terms of the dizziness. And we're trying to combat the dizziness with phenarizine, which surprisingly is causing more tiredness. So we're trying to solve one problem, and the medication causes a side effect, and we tried to treat the side effect with another medication which is causing tiredness. Another person who had pain, 3 children, was very busy, and has insomnia, restless legs, and is now sleeping better with antihistamines, which was prescribed for one of the children with allergy. So people try everything, don't they? Somebody who had B12 injections, they're typically tired, probably 2-3 weeks before the injection is due. They know they need injections. My patient with polymyalgia, they have intramuscular steroid injection that helps the tiredness and the muscle pain. Somebody who had restless legs, we uncovered they had iron deficiency anemia, and that person needed endoscopy. Someone who's not as tired, but still in pain despite tramadol. And if they take too much tramadol to control the pain, they get more tired. So the pain medications causes tiredness. Somebody who's restless due to menopause, but the blood levels of the estrogen and the FSH levels were normal, so she couldn't get the HRT to help the restlessness. In the past, people with menopause-related symptoms were able to get HRT to control some of the symptoms. But now, most GPs are quite reluctant to give hormone treatment because of the worry about breast cancer and uterine and ovarian cancer and things. So these were the main themes which I uncovered from the 14, 15 patients I've seen. So what did we do? For most of them, we made sure that the inflammation isn't high, because many of my patients had an inflammatory condition, an autoimmune condition. We made sure that we're actually treating the inflammation well, because treating inflammation is a priority. Unless the inflammation is controlled, the tiredness carries on. And we check for anything which can correct easily: iron deficiency, folic acid deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, cortisol and estrogen deficiency. Managing pain, but don't over-treat pain, because over-medication causes tiredness. And we had to talk about sleep. We did talk about sleep for most of these patients, and talking about unhelpful habits. My mind goes around, so I went out for a cigarette and then had a coffee, and I tried to get back to bed and can't sleep, obviously. I'm getting very angry at the moment. So I've got my Twitter on early in the morning, which is not helping, so I need to turn off Twitter soon once all this parliamentary debate's finished. So that makes you tired and sleepy during the daytime. And check for snoring, restlessness, teeth grinding. Anybody ask about teeth grinding? Any of the doctors ask about teeth grinding? So this is a standard question in my clinic. None of my colleagues ask about it, but I ask for it regularly in my clinic, because that's a sign of tension, but also a sign of airway narrowing. So people with sleep apnea tend to chew to keep the airways open. That's subconscious. So we talk about increasing physical activity, because that helps both with preventing the muscle from deconditioning, but also helps regularize sleep. Takes the mind off your worries. So physical activity is a pill for many conditions. Losing weight and diet, we don't always have time to cover, but we do try to go through it. Relaxation and meditation. Talk about dry eyes and dry mouth and dehydration. A lot of things to cover, but we only had 2 minutes with this patient. So we do need to find a little tool to try and acknowledge and identify tiredness and also the cause of tiredness in those 2 minutes. So what is the most important thing I did? Is that I talked about tiredness. It's difficult for everyone to do when the time is short, but we do need to find a way to ask about tiredness in the rheumatology clinics. So I think it will be useful for most clinics to have simple tools and questionnaires whilst you're waiting in the waiting room to jot down your priorities: pain, disability, medications, tiredness, sleep, so that before you come into clinic, you have a snapshot of what the problems are to cover in the clinic. So you have an agenda. So one of them is called the musculoskeletal health questionnaire, which is fairly new, designed by the Arthritis Research UK now versus arthritis. And another tool to actually identify how tired you get, how sleepy you get during daytime is the Epworth Sleepiness Score. So the musculoskeletal health questionnaire has about 12 different sets of questions. It talks about pain and sleep and fatigue and overall impact of all illnesses. And it has 2 or 3 specific questions about sleep. In the last 2 weeks, how tired you are, and how your energy is, and how your physical activities are. So it does address 2 or 3 different questions that are pertinent to the tiredness. And the Epworth Sleepiness questionnaire is your daytime sleepiness. It doesn't actually measure tiredness exactly, but is a proxy measure of tiredness. And it's quite often helpful when you're overweight and if you think that you might have sleep apnea and snoring. So it asks you questions of how likely you are to fall asleep during the daytime when you do these 8 different activities. It includes driving, but there's also a children's questionnaire as well, which is an adaptation for children who have the daytime sleepiness. Ask about school and lying down after lunch, etc. So I think with these simple tools, we can identify and acknowledge tiredness and fatigue, and actually gives you something to work on. So after the clinic appointment, or in the waiting rooms, we can have booklets similar to the book which Dr. Hackett had mentioned. There's another one from the arthritis, National Rheumatoid Arthritis Society, called The Fatigue Matters. So I find that a very, very good book. So you have something to work through yourself without having to need a therapist or a referral to a clinic. And that one also has a similar fatigue diary, again a 2-week diary. And I like this diary because it gives you the 5 different ways of your activity. Busy, moderately active, I'm resting, I'm asleep, and I've crashed. So this is what I think we should be doing in a short space of time. If there's anything else you would like us to do in that 15 minutes covering all the other medical illnesses, this is the time to ask questions. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I have. Well, I do have some leaflets for arthritis Gates, which promotes physical activity in group therapies and hydrotherapy for people in the Northeast, so I'll leave them in one of the stands. Okay, thank you.
So my name's Victoria Barton, you're probably sick of hearing my name now. And I'm not off script because I've got chronic fatigue and I didn't have the time or the energy to learn it off by heart, so excuse me. I was so excited and honoured to be asked to be part of this event because fatigue has affected me for most of my life. I do have a few different conditions, and chronic fatigue and chronic pain are the main symptoms of most of them. All of my conditions are invisible, currently untreatable, and very often misunderstood, and none of them are curable. So I'm here today because I want that to change. So I'll start by trying to describe my fatigue for you. It's really difficult to explain if you haven't experienced it, and I hope that my story and some of the descriptions ring true for other patients. But please remember that this is my own personal experience. I feel like my fatigue's got 3 strands. There's the CFS fatigue, pain fatigue, and then the one that I get from depression as well. So my CFS fatigue feels like I'm just completely drained. I constantly feel as if I've run a marathon. I never have. Every bit of my body is heavy, and doing every little thing is absolutely exhausting. The pain is what mainly affects my mobility. I've got pain all over, all of the time, and then I get stabbing pains in specific joints as well. They're either always there or they make me jump and shout a bit, so if I'm a bit dramatic, just ignore me, I'm fine. That leaves me constantly tense as well, which makes me both mentally and physically exhausted, but that one's a kind of normal exhausted, if that makes sense. Then the fatigue that I get from depression is totally different from my CFS or pain fatigue. I just can't be bothered with anything. I can't reply to texts or emails. It takes me ages to do anything. I just don't have the energy to talk or engage with life. It just drains my motivation. And all 3 of these also affect my memory, which is one of the things that I find really hard to deal with. I forget words, forget what I'm doing, lose track of conversations, which is really scary and frustrating. I actually forgot to lock my front door after the carer left on Monday last week, and I didn't realise until Wednesday when I went to unlock it for her again. Do things like that all of the time. So I'd like those of you without fatigue to try and imagine what I've just described. Then add them all together. Then try and imagine this being your reality all the time, every day, for years. So my health has been deteriorating over the last 12 years, but most dramatically over the last 5, and it affects every single part of my life. I've had to adapt my life over the years to cope. I've had to change things like where I live, how I manage my personal care, how I interact with people. I've got to plan and organise everything just to get through the day and to get anything done. I can physically do things for myself, but it's exhausting. Sandy's telling me to move on, I'm not ready yet. It's exhausting and painful. Plus, if I do something like wash my hair, then I'll not have the energy to cook myself a meal. So I have to make choices between either having a shower or going out in the day, because doing both is going to leave me absolutely exhausted. I can go out and do something fun, like go to a comedy club with some friends, but I've got to make sure that I'm doing literally nothing else that day, like laying on the sofa all day, microwave meals, no shower, no getting dressed, no nothing. And then I've got to book a rest day the day after, at least one day. I can't save up energy, doesn't work like that for me. But I know that the consequences will be worse if I do too much in one day. And most people don't have to make choices like this, but I do. And for those of you without chronic fatigue, have a little think about what you do every day. Just managing the basics of life has got to be my priority. Other things get pushed to one side and they might eventually get done, or might ask for help, or they'll just constantly be at the bottom of my list forever. So to help you try and put it into perspective, my sister and I once compared step counts for a day. She did 3,000 steps before breakfast, just getting her son up, pottering about the house, looking after our pets. I did about 200 in my whole day. And that was walking around my flat to get food and drinks, getting to the loo and getting between my bed and the sofa. That's a pretty normal day for me, and I was absolutely wrecked. So basically, living with fatigue is a constant challenge. The organisation and decision-making involved in everyday life is exhausting in itself. There's no easy answers, no cures, and currently no specific treatments available. So here's a bit of my health journey for you, which I'll talk you through. I had a really active childhood. I was always on the go, loved school, had a really busy life. But all of that changed when I was about 14. I started to feel really tired and struggled to get to school. In my family, basically, if you can get out of bed, then you're fine, so you go to school or work. But with both of my parents working, I didn't have the option of being off sick, but some days I just couldn't manage it at all. Luckily for me, but not for her, my auntie, who's here today, had had ME for a few years before that as well. So when I got ill, my family believed me. This was a massive benefit for me. And I know lots of people just get written off and disbelieved when they try to explain chronic fatigue. And this was in the 90s, so like it just wasn't seen as a proper condition then. And my mum was amazing. She took me to see every doctor she could find. She even looked into complementary therapies trying to help me. As you can see, I've tried quite a lot of different things over the years. There's no cure, so I'll basically give anything a go. I've tried diets, supplements, all kinds of different therapies. None have actually helped me very much. But when there's no cure, like I said, you'll try anything. I do have to say, though, that my mum's use of feng shui and rearranging my bedroom furniture because of the ley lines in the house has to be the weirdest one so far. But thank you so much, Mum, for trying. I didn't really understand what ME meant. Oh, no. I didn't understand what ME meant or what was wrong with me. I just knew that I couldn't manage the things that I used to do. I had to stop doing sports at school, and I ended up being hospitalised in a mental health ward because that's what they thought was wrong with me at the time. I lost some friends because I'd been labelled crazy, but I learned to focus on the people who really cared about me. My mum, my sister, and my best friend Judith wrote me loads of cards and sent me pictures and stuff while I was in hospital, and I've still got all of them. It's a huge support to hear from people who believed that I was ill and were there to support me, even though the doctors didn't know what to do with me. After my stay in hospital, I did get a lot better, But I will say that I don't think that I've ever had a period of full recovery. I just figured out what I could and couldn't do. I was pacing myself, but I didn't know that term. I knew what my limitations were, but I did, and still do, as Vicky will tell you, push them to breaking point. If I paced properly at the minute, I'd never actually leave the house. And you can't really do much in the 3 minutes that it takes me for my fatigue to get worse if I do something really crazy, like the washing up. So my life pretty much got back to normal until about 12 years ago, when I started to get pains in my hands and my wrists. Autoimmune disease and rheumatoid conditions run in my family, so went to the doctors. I then got referred to a liver condition clinic and was diagnosed with PBC, which is an autoimmune disease that affects the liver and the bile ducts. The main symptoms are chronic fatigue and chronic pain. So again, I got no real advice on how to manage the pain or the fatigue. I added in some painkillers and some other stuff to treat the other symptoms and just got on as best as I could. Then about 5 years ago, my pain levels were getting higher and higher. It was massively affecting my mobility. I was struggling to walk from one end of my office to the other, and it was about as big as this room. Luckily, I've got an amazing GP who prescribed more pain meds, and Kate, who you heard from earlier, worked with me to find ways around managing my life and my work. But then I got to the point where I just couldn't manage anymore. So it was one morning in September 2014. I was absolutely exhausted, in loads of pain, and with my crazy work ethic kicking in, I dragged myself out of bed and got to work, kind of. I'd parked my car and I got halfway to the office and sat on a bollard crying because I couldn't physically go any further. Luckily for me, some of my colleagues walked past and they helped me back to my car. I rang my GP and he told me to take a couple of weeks off to try and recover. That turned into a couple of months. So during those months, I started Vicky's exercise class with her at the Cresta, took advice from Kate to improve my sleep and started to increase my activities again slowly. But this is when my invisible illnesses became visible. I had to get a walking stick. I applied for a blue badge. I also applied for PIP and started to explain to my friends and family the impact that my health was having on my life. I went to see Fi, who you heard from this morning, about what to do next, and got referred to the pain clinic at the RVI where they diagnosed fibromyalgia, which also has chronic pain and chronic fatigue, so you can kind of see a pattern emerging here. I did eventually get back to work on reduced hours, which was amazing, but unfortunately my pain and fatigue continued to increase and I had to carry on cutting down my hours at work. And then in 2016 I had to take redundancy because I couldn't manage anymore. So in the 3 years since I've had to stop working, my health has continued to deteriorate. I tend to get a cold about twice a year, which just knocks me for 6. I'm stuck in the house for about 2 weeks at least. My pain levels increase and they don't actually go back down again. So I saw this graph recently, which was used by a researcher to describe how a normal illness affects somebody who's classed as having frailty. So I just want to use the laser pointer. Do I just press the red button? Yeah. Right, so you've got a normal person who's independent, you get a cold or a bug or something, you get ill, you then recover and you get back to normal again. Then you've got a person who's classed as frail, or in my mind it works for people with chronic illnesses as well. We're already more dependent. We get hit by a bug worse, it takes longer to recover, and then we never actually get back to where we were before. So 2 years ago, my pain was so bad that I went back to the pain clinic. I was given the options of trying to continue how I was, or come off all the pain medications so that I could start on something new, and I decided to come off the pain meds. Last year was an absolute nightmare. I had withdrawal symptoms, pain spikes, fatigue increases, and my depression and anxiety got worse as well. I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel that I was stuck in. So in January this year, I had a slight nervous breakdown at my GP. This is perfectly normal. He's always amazed when I don't cry at him in appointments. But over the year, I'd managed to come off fentanyl, Oromorph, pregabalin, duloxetine, and I was down to 4 codeine a day instead of 8. I couldn't do it any longer. I couldn't take another 4 months of all the pain, and I just wanted to start on something new. So we decided that I'd do 2 more weeks on 2 codeine a day and then start on tramadol. And I have to say, it's absolutely amazing. My pain levels have gone from about an 8 or a 9 out of 10 every day to about 5 or a 6 out of 10 every day. The only way that I can describe it is that I feel like a person again. My mobility is better than it's been in about 3 years. I can use my stick. I've used my walking stick to get to the loo. I would have needed my scooter a few months ago. It's just amazing. Everybody's saying that I look brighter, and it's had a massive positive impact on my mental health as well. The only downside is that obviously I've got far too excited about this, and I've done far too much. I keep looking at Vicky because I need an appointment with her to help me at the minute. I had been keeping all of my plates and stuff on the bench in my kitchen, so I didn't have to open doors and lift things down, just save a bit of energy. I'd put them away. I was so excited. I've had to get them back out again because it's not the best of plans. My fatigue's my main issue again at the minute. My legs are aching because I've walked too far. My arms are heavy because I've been doing daft things like driving and showering. These little things are too much for me, and I really struggle to pace myself because I want to be independent. I've always lived by myself, and I do have carers who help me with things. And also I cut down on how often they've come, but I've had to increase that again as well. Because I need to figure out what I can and can't manage now, but still have the energy to be able to get out and do things. So I want to give you a few tips on how I've managed to cope with my health. So the first one is to look after your mental health as much as your physical health. It's all interlinked. I've suffered from depression on and off throughout my life since I was a teenager. And sometimes I would link it to struggling with my health, but other times I just get depression. And I've seen counsellors and psychologists over the years, and they've really helped me to adapt to my life, manage my mood, and accept the new normals. And the happy pills do help a lot as well. I like them. So I've got to focus on self-care and taking the time to relax. I find that a sauna and a massage really helps with my pain. And I haven't been able to manage much in this last year and a bit, but I do still try to go to the cinema a few times a month, listen to audiobooks, and spend lots of time with my friends and family. Which leads me on to tip number 2. Surround yourself with the right people, friends and family, and your medical team. My current medical team is absolutely amazing. After I was diagnosed with PBC, I was referred to see Julia Newton, who took me to the Cresta Chronic Fatigue Clinic when she started it. I think I was one of the first patients there. I saw Kate and Julia at first, and then when my mobility started getting bad, Vicky joined in, and I also still see Vincent, the psychologist, as well. I've been with my same GP for 12 years, and he's amazing. He laughs at me and with me. He calms me down and listens to my concerns and lets me be part of the decisions about my treatment plans and referrals. I went in with him with a list last year because I was convinced there must be something else wrong with me, that my pain and fatigue can't be like this for no reason. I was like, I've got MS, lupus, Lyme disease, I had millions of different things, and he sat and talked through like why I didn't have most of them. So that was really nice, bless him. But I did get referred back to rheumatology and got diagnosed with hypermobility, so just another one to add to the list. I've also seen the physio and psychologist at the pain clinic. I was with them for about a year and a half, and they were brilliant. They worked with me on managing my pain around and in conjunction with what I was being told by the fatigue clinic. I've been so lucky with all the medical professionals that help and support me, and I can never thank them enough for the impact that they've had on my life. They've worked with me on conditions that have no cures and come up with plans to make small improvements to my quality of life, which is just huge. And I'm getting emotional because there's 2 of them in the room here, so. But also my friends and family are amazing. My mum's going to be mortified, but there she is on the top there with my dad. That's my sister at the bottom with my nephew. All of my friends and family make it easier for me to cope with my life, basically. My mum and my sister have always been there for me and have helped me loads over the years, from things like bringing me food, taking me to appointments, and keeping in touch when I'm stuck in the house and making me smile. My dad, who's at the top there, is just hilarious. He's a paramedic, so if you haven't been hit by a train, then you're fine. Stop whinging. So when I start going into self-pity mode, he's like, shut up, your life's fab, you go out for lunches all the time, stop whinging. He's also really good at fixing things, and he fixed my walker for me the other day because it was falling apart a bit, so thanks, Dad. My niece and nephew, Jacob and Amelia, make my walker and my scooter fun. Jacob likes to ride on the back and pretend to be Superman, which is so cool. And Amelia and Jacob both like pretending to be me walking like a slow person with my walking stick, which just has me in hysterics. As you can see, even the adults always want to have a go on my scooter. That's some of my friends there at a wedding, and when I went up to the Calvert Trust at Kielder. There's pictures of me here at concerts, at the zoo, weddings, that's out for lunch one day, and I even went on a submarine trip when I went to Lanzarote. I do loads of fun things. My friends and family all make adjustments so that we can go places that I can manage and at times that suit me. The ones with health conditions, Sandy and Julia are here today, and Ange at the back there, so they just get it. We can help and advise each other, and they all keep my spirits up when I'm feeling low. I know it's a strain on all of us, and I know it's hard for my friends and family to see my health decline and to adapt and make adjustments themselves, but they still do it without complaining, which I really do appreciate. So thank you, everybody. My next tip is to take control of your healthcare. Get information and fight for what you need. I really didn't do this until about 5 years ago. I think that my ambivalence to my health came from being passed from pillar to post as a teenager, and I knew that there wasn't any cure, and I hadn't been told of anything that I could do to help myself, so I just had to get on with things. But after struggling, adapting, and living with invisible illnesses, I've gone through lots of ups and downs. Lots of times when I haven't stood up for myself, lots of times when I've said yes when I should have said no, keeping people happy when I should have kept myself well. I'm absolutely rubbish at pacing, and I know this is what I need to focus on to achieve my goals. But living with a disability is a constant battle. We've got to fight for everything, for benefits, accessibility, understanding, and everything is just that little bit harder. Help and support is generally hidden, and you don't know what you don't know, so sharing information is absolutely vital. I found out so many things from other people with health problems, and I even found out from the guy who got me my mobility card sorted that Motability have a secret fund of money that can help you pay for adaptations to your car. I mean, who knew? It's not advertised anywhere. Trying to live like this is really tough, but I was brought up to fight, to keep going and never give in. I really value my independence, but I did get to a point where I had to accept my limitations and start to ask for and accept help. So my next point is acceptance doesn't mean giving in. You do have to be realistic. I've never been completely bedbound by my conditions as some people are, but at my worst about 2 years ago, I got up one night being sick and couldn't get myself off the bathroom floor for about 3 hours. It was absolutely awful, and I felt as if the pain and fatigue had won. I had to start being realistic about what was happening to my body, and I had to start asking for and accepting help. That's when I had to get the carers to come and help me manage the day-to-day tasks like the washing up, preparing food, and doing the laundry. I've had a cleaner for years, but I also had to start going to a hairdresser's to get a wash and a blow dry. It means that I don't have to straighten it or do anything to it all week, and I don't feel like an absolute tramp most of the time as well, so that's good. But having people help me do normal things, it's awful. It's made me feel even more useless, like I was a huge burden on my friends and family, and just society in general. I felt like an utter waste of space, and my mental health has never been lower. The small day-to-day changes that I've had to make aren't as hard to accept as the big ones. I can get my head around needing an automatic car, having aids in my house. I actually love my toilet frame. It sounds insane, but it's mint. I can use my scooter with a smile, even though I hate it. It's much better when the kids are there, but trying to think about or plan for the future gets really overwhelming. Things that most people don't even think about in terms of their health really worry me. Questions from, will I be able to manage on holiday? How will I cope financially long term? They'll lead me on to, will I ever be able to have kids? And will I still be able to live independently by myself? I feel like I've accepted being disabled. I accept that I've got limitations, and from going off the past few years, my health probably isn't going to get that much better. But that's being realistic, it's not giving in. And from that mindset, I can focus on living the best life that I can. So my next point is to find something valuable that works for you. My GP asked me last year, before I started coming off all of my pain meds, where I wanted to get to. And my current goal is to get out of the house 5 days a week for a few hours at a time, every week, and manage my personal care myself. Now, to most people that doesn't sound like much, but I haven't been able to do that for about 2 years, so for me it's absolutely huge. My long-term goal is to be able to financially support myself again. I'm living on benefits at the moment, and it's demoralising, exhausting and humiliating. But I need to get to a point with my health when I'm stable for long enough to be able to be consistent enough to work again. So in the meantime, I need to feel useful and use my brain, because most of the time I feel like it's just melted. So I've been volunteering with Voice North. The meetings really helped me. My friend Sandy recommended it to me, and she was right. I love hearing about the research projects, giving my views. I feel intelligent and helpful again, and it's become one of the high points of my month. So my final tip is to focus on and find the silver linings. I didn't get any advice from doctors as a teenager on how to manage my fatigue, so I just got on with my life. And I do still feel as if I can either lay in bed or on the sofa all day, or get out and try and do things. I'm still going to be exhausted and have to live with the consequences, but it's much better than staying in all the time. I will say that this isn't always possible, but I do aim to do something as often as I can to try and keep myself happy. I get so much joy from spending time with my family and friends. I love playing with my nieces and nephews, and I try to do things with them as often as I can. A funny message, a picture, or a short FaceTime video makes my day when I'm stuck in the house. And when I can go out, I go for lots of lunches and coffees. I go to concerts, the theatre, and I even managed to go on holiday by myself last year. I've got many good things in my life, and lots that I can still do, so I choose to focus on that. Fatigue is so hard to describe because I can do things, but it's hard. Every movement's a struggle. I constantly feel like I'm dragging myself through mud, so I have to adapt. I limit what I do so that the consequences aren't too bad. Driving to my sister's is really hard for me. It's painful and exhausting, but I push myself to do it for special occasions because I want to see my family. Being out of the house after 4 o'clock knocks my whole bedtime routine out of whack, so an evening outing has got to be really special for me to make the effort, and it's only going to happen once a month at the most. My life is all about choices and consequences. And that's why I believe that research into fatigue causes, treatments, and cures is absolutely vital. Like you've heard this morning, there's just so many different conditions that include chronic fatigue, and so little that we can do about it. I've been taught how to pace myself, focus on self-care, be mindful, and exercise within my limits. But it's really hard, and it doesn't make a massive amount of difference, and it takes years to see any improvement, so it gets so frustrating. I don't know what's going to happen with my future. Hopefully I'll be able to manage my pain and get to a place with my fatigue where I can pace myself well enough to stay as independent as possible. I would love to know which of my conditions is actually causing the most pain and fatigue, or is it just a combination of them all? I want people who are diagnosed with fatigue conditions in the future to have some treatments available. I want a cure. I want a pill. I wish I could take one that would give me some energy. Somebody actually asked me the other day if I just drink loads of coffee. Well, trust me, caffeine doesn't work. It's not magic. And I've got a liver condition, so I need to avoid that. There's so many questions and not nearly enough answers. So it's up to you, the medical professionals and researchers, to find some answers for us. So I hope that that's given you a bit of insight into what it's like to live with chronic fatigue, and I'm happy to answer any questions during lunch, so thank you.
So much, Victoria. That was excellent.
everybody take their seats again? We're just getting ready to start. We're starting back now, yes, Mum. Hi, thank you. I hope lunch was all right for everybody. We're all refreshed and rejuvenated and ready for our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Stuart Watson, who's an academic clinical senior lecturer and is going to talk to us today about fatigue in patients with depression. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I work for Newcastle University, I work for Northumberland Town and Weir Trust, and together these two organisations come to form NCMD, the Northern Centre for Mood Disorder. I'm a psychiatrist, and my name is Stuart Watson, so hello everybody. And could I say hello also to, I understand we're being live streamed, so hello to everybody who's watching this at home or at work. So, I want to start you off today with a little bit of anatomy and physiology. So the nervous system, divided into two. The nervous system. Divided into two. The central nervous system, which is basically the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else. The peripheral nervous system, in turn, is divided into the somatic nervous system or the voluntary nervous system. So when you want to move your arm, a message comes from the central nervous system through the nerves in your peripheral nervous system to your muscle, and your arm moves. Not interested in that so much today. Interested in this, the autonomic nervous system. So this is the system that controls and regulates lots of bodily functions. You'll be familiar with the sympathetic nervous system, that's a flight or fight system, and the parasympathetic nervous system. That's what we use for resting and digesting. So all of those sandwiches in your tummy now, you've got the parasympathetic system activated to deal with that. Now, we know that the autonomic nervous system goes wrong in certain conditions like MSA, multisystem atrophy. And here we see symptoms. So we see things like dizziness on standing, dry and troublesome eyes or vision, being constipated, bloated, having diarrhea, bladder symptoms, incontinence, and inappropriate, unhelpful sweating. And we also see signs of autonomic dysregulation. So we can measure variability in the heart rate that works in a different way, and we can measure postural hypotension. Now, what I also just want to say before I go on really is just to say that this does seem like a really good meeting. Where's Helen? I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed by the sort of quality of the speakers. I know you've had Fi this morning, and you've had Kate. So tremendous. You've got Cara next, and I don't know if anyone knows Cara. Does anyone here know Cara Thomas? Cara's on next, and Cara's very, very impressive. So I want you to sort of remember this, because in 10 years' time, you're going to be able to look back and you're going to be able to say, I saw her first. I saw her before she got the Nobel Prize. I saw her when you could still see her in small, intimate venues. She's jet-lagged, having just come back from Australia. But yes, a tremendous panel of speakers. But the one person that isn't here, a surprising omission, is Julia. Where's Julia? So Julia started off, my journey with fatigue started off with Julia Newton. And she got in contact to say that, so Julia's interested in autonomic nervous system dysregulation, and she thought that it may well be responsible for much of the fatigue that many people with chronic fatigue syndrome have. And so she got in contact with me, and we got a grant, she got a grant, which allowed us to appoint Laura McLachlan, who's now in Sweden. And Laura ran this study. And Laura showed that in chronic fatigue syndrome, there are higher rates of all of these symptoms of autonomic dysregulation. And we also worked with this guy, Andreas Finkelmeyer. Now, Andreas, I really love this picture of Andreas because he looks so cool in his red glasses. Uncharacteristically cool, I have to say. But one of the things about chronic fatigue syndrome, one of the things about autonomic dysregulation is that the autonomic system controls the way that blood is moved around the body. So when you're in sympathetic mode and you're in flight or fight mode, you need the blood in your heart, you need the blood in your muscles. If it's not getting there, then you're not going to be able to respond properly. When you need to think, you need the blood in your head. When you need to rest and digest those sandwiches, you need the blood around your guts. So that's one of the things the autonomic nervous system does. What Andreas showed is that that doesn't work properly in chronic fatigue syndrome, and he showed that he looked at the way that blood pools in the liver. The liver absorbs an awful lot of blood rather than being pumped around the body properly. Now, we also showed that, I know that you can't read that, but it's to help me more than anything. We also showed this relationship between the level of autonomic dysregulation and cognitive impairment. So we showed that the more of these symptoms, these orange background symptoms people have, the worse was their memory. And that makes sense, because if you're not getting the blood into your head, then your thinking's not going to be as sharp, your memory's not going to be as good as you would like it to be. But having said all of that, I'm not actually here to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm here to talk about depression. And if you'd have asked me 5 years ago which part of the nervous system would be important in depression, I would have said every time it's the brain. It has got nothing to do with your guts, nothing to do with your liver. It's the brain that's important. But looking at this work that Julia did, it did make us think, you know, really we need to look at that also in depression. So we're doing the CAP-MEM study. We've got Magda, who started it off, and then Kelly, who took it over, and they're looking after the CAP-MEM study. In the CAP-MEM study, what we do is we ask people whether they have any mental health problems. Do you have depression? Do you have any other mental health problems? Or not. So we divide people into 3 groups. The whole world can be divided into 3 groups, according to me. Those with depression, those with other mental health problems, and those with neither. And that's what we did. And we asked people to do a compass, which is a measure of these symptoms. And we also asked them to do a test of memory and concentration. And the questions that we had is autonomic dysregulation more common in depression than it is in other groups? Does it explain the fatigue? And does it also explain the memory impairment? Now, we did this as part of the Clinical Research Network. So I don't know how familiar you all are with the Clinical Research Network, but it's effectively, as I see it, a way of connecting the country. So that we're doing this study here, we've developed it here, but we can deliver it across the whole country. So we can look at people, we've got people in 17 different sites, they're the little blue crosses, 17 different sites across the country. We've got 5 other sites waiting to come on board. So we can make things happen in a bigger scale than we otherwise would. And we've got Jamie here. Well, I've still got Jamie here, who's, well, you'll see in a minute actually. We've got Jamie here, who's looking after the study for us in the northeast. There he is. And we've got other people. So that's Jess, who's in Sussex. We've got Kay in Portsmouth. And we've got Alan down in Cornwall. And they're all working together on this study. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say while I was stood up here with a microphone is that the Clinical Research Network reminds us that across the whole country we need to work together. But what we also need to do is in the northeast make sure that we work together. So make sure that we've got the hospitals and the universities and members of the public and patients all coming together to think about research, to think what the questions to ask are, to think how to best ask them, and to make sure that that research gets delivered properly. And on this picture, and the NCMD is a good example of how that works, Northern Centre for Mood Disorder. On the picture you've got Sam, who's here, delighted to have a picture, pixelated as it may be, and Carly and Hamish. So I would just encourage you to go and talk to Sam if you haven't done so already, and find out a little bit more about NCMD, and look at how you can get involved. You can find out more about it. You can join the register, which means that you get all the information about the public events and all the other different bits and pieces. Right, anyway, but back to the CAPMEM study. So we've got to have some figures. This is our data. So first of all, this is the level of fatigue. And what you might or might not be able to see is that, pointer. This is depression, this is the healthy group, and these are patients. And what you'll see is higher levels of depression, higher levels of fatigue in the depressed people compared to our other groups, compared to healthy controls and our other people with mental health problems. You'll also see that higher scores in depression on the compass, so more autonomic dysregulation. Just as we saw in chronic fatigue, we see more autonomic dysregulation in depression. And then we did these tests of memory and concentration. Now this test is a choice reaction task, and what happens is the yellow arrow comes up. It could be pointing in either direction, and what you've got to do, quick as you can, is press the left or right button on your keyboard in the direction of the arrow, and it shows how fast you do it. And people in depression are slower. This is a terrible, awful memory test, and the details of it don't sort of matter particularly, but I'll tell you them anyway. So across the top you've got those different symbols, and they move progressively across, and the final one's covered up, and you've got to say what the final one is, but it's underneath the black space. So you've got to remember what. So you've got to know that that square is going to be covered up next. So you've got to be ready to. You've got to say what that is. That's a circle, and then be ready to say that's a square. But by the time you know you're onto it, it's covered up. Details of it don't matter, but it's very difficult. But the point is, people with depression don't do so well as other people. This is another test. This is the digit symbol substitution task. Again, the details of it not particularly important, but it's a test of psychomotor speed. You've got to drag you match. So that number 6 is a circle. So you match the circle, drag it up there. Then you're on to number 7. Can't read it from here. Number 1. That's number 1. And that's the squares. You've got to drag the square. You've got to do it as quick as you can. People with depression are slower than healthy controls. And this is a trails test where you've got to find A, then 1, then B, then 2, then C, then 3, and go through in that order, follow it round. People with depression are slower than other patients. So across the board on these tests of memory and concentration, people are slower. Now this is when we ask people, what's your memory like? What problems are you having? People with depression are reporting, and people with across the board with mental health problems actually are reporting more memory problems than healthy controls. So, what have we got? The reason that I've got a wave here is my old maths teacher, Mr. Toon. He always used to say to me when we were doing maths, he said on every 7th wave we recap, we stop and recap. So we're just recapping here. In depression, I've said more fatigue, higher compass scores, higher autonomic dysregulation, and more cognitive impairment. That's what we've got to so far. And that's all reasonably interesting. But it's only interesting, what's interesting is whether this autonomic dysregulation is responsible for everything else. Is it that the autonomic dysregulation is causing the fatigue, and is it causing the memory problems? Now, one way that we've got of looking at that is to look at the relationship between the two. So if those people who are scoring higher on their compass scores are also scoring higher on fatigue, then that suggests that the two are connected, and it maybe suggests that it's your autonomic dysregulation that is responsible for the fatigue or the memory problems. It's not, people will tell you correlations doesn't mean causation, but it's a pointer. It suggests that we should really be thinking about this more seriously. And indeed there is a relationship. So the higher, the worse your autonomic dysregulation, the worse your memory. It's not exact, the circles don't all follow the line, so there's other things affecting memory as well as autonomic dysregulation, but it's important, it's part of the story. Similarly, it's maybe not quite so impressive, but there's more circles here because more people did the study. And I have to say that each of those circles is a person who's done this study, and we can get, one can despair sometimes of one's fellow man and do things like vote for Brexit. But yet we've had 1,400 people who've stepped forward and who've done this study who said, yeah, go on, why not? I'll do that, and for nothing, for nothing back. And we have to fill in an ethics form that says, what will the participant get for doing this research? In what way will they be helped? And you have to put, none. They won't be helped at all. But people do it, and it's essential that people do it, and important that they do it. And it means that we can start to study things, and we can start to look at things, and we can look at relationships, and start to think about what's going on for people with fatigue, for people with depression. So there's a relationship. The more autonomic dysregulation you've got, the more you are fatigued. Now, you can therefore... So, let's recap. So, I've said that autonomic dysregulation causes symptoms such as dizziness on standing, because blood's not getting to the right place in a timely manner. When you lie down and you stand up suddenly, your blood's got to work against gravity. If it doesn't do that quickly, you're not getting enough blood into your head, you're going to feel dizzy. So autonomic dysregulation causes dizziness on standing. I've said that this is important in chronic fatigue syndrome. And I've shown that there's a link between autonomic dysregulation and cognitive impairment in CFS. So I thought we'd better look at depression. I said that the Clinical Research Network links the country together and allows UK research to compete with research across the rest of the world. I've said that research can only happen because of the selfless support of participants, and I've encouraged you all to talk to Sam on the NCMD stand and to join the Reggie stand. I've shown that people with depression report more symptoms of autonomic dysregulation, more fatigue, and more memory problems, and I've shown that these are linked, suggesting that the autonomic dysregulation might be responsible. Can't say for certain, but that's what it started to look like. What I haven't done is said anything about what we could do about that. I haven't said how we can change autonomic dysregulation. I've not talked about management. I've talked about trying to get an understanding of what's happening so that we can think about next steps. But there are people who are doing things about management and who are trying to help, as we speak, people with chronic fatigue. Has anyone seen that person today? That's my missus. Now, she's not seen me stand up in public and speak since our wedding day. 23 years ago, I think she's expecting me to have a bouquet of flowers under here for my mum and another one for her mum. But she and Michelle are working for St Oswald's, and they've got a stand outside. So whilst I've been busy trying to work out what might be underlying fatigue, the team at St Oswald's are working with people with lifelong limiting conditions and looking at what can be done right now to help fatigue. So I'd equally, as I encourage you to go and see Sam, I'd equally encourage you to come and see us. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll leave that one up.
Thanks, Stuart. That was really, really interesting. Thanks for talking today. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Cara Thomas, who is a research associate at Newcastle University, and she's going to be talking about cellular energy production in ME/CFS.
fear Stuart may have somewhat bigged me up. So I want to manage expectations a bit to begin with. Public speaking is not my thing, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I'm Cara. I work at Newcastle University, and I'm a laboratory-based researcher. So I'm not a clinician, so I have nothing to do with the clinical side. So this is going to be a very lab-based talk. So my work looks at cellular energy production in ME/CFS. I know a lot of you are ME/CFS patients or have a link to ME/CFS, but I'm aware there are also some other patient groups in the room. So I'm just going to start with a bit of background to what ME/CFS is, then talk about cellular energy production, one of the techniques we used, and then some of our results. So ME/CFS is a disease based on the symptom of fatigue, and it's a severe form of fatigue which lasts a minimum of 6 months and can't be alleviated by rest or sleep. Other key symptoms of the disease include post-exertion malaise, which is often thought about as, after exercise, or when somebody's been for a run or somebody's been for a walk. But for ME/CFS patients, this can be a malaise after something as simple as reading a book or doing a crossword or walking down the stairs. These small victories for ME/CFS patients often have huge consequences, as we heard about from Victoria earlier. Other symptoms associated with the disease include sleep and memory concentration problems, muscle pain, joint pain, so a huge list of symptoms associated with the disease. There's currently no definitive diagnostic criteria, which largely stems from the fact that we have no known biomarkers of the disease. So this has been a big problem in that we don't have a diagnostic test. So for getting certain clinicians to recognise the disease, this has been a big issue. There's also currently no treatment for the disease. So if we can manage the symptoms or try and manage the symptoms as best we can, but in order to treat the disease as a whole, we have no widely effective options. So onto the cellular energy production. So cells produce energy in the form of ATP, and they use this as sort of the energy currency of the cell. They use this to complete all their cellular processes. So it's a vital requirement for life, essentially. And there are two major energy production pathways in the cell. There's mitochondrial respiration, so this is from an organelle within the cell, mitochondria, and they're known as the powerhouse of the cell. That's what they do, they produce the bulk of our energy. We also have glycolysis, which produces less energy, but it is still the second most important cellular energy pathway within the cell. And these are the two pathways I'm going to be talking about and how we looked at them. So in terms of my studies, what we aimed to do was compare an ME/CFS cohort and a healthy control cohort to look at how we're producing energy and whether there's differences between the two cohorts. In order to do this, we used peripheral blood mononuclear cells, or PBMCs. So these are a cell type found in the bloodstream, which first of all means they're supposedly easily accessible, in that all we need to do is take a blood sample. There's no invasive procedures, there's no biopsies need taken, so we can do this at the end of clinical appointments. Also, PBMCs are involved in the immune response. And as we heard from Phi earlier, there's been links between ME/CFS and the immune response and potential dysregulation within the immune system. So again, we felt these would be an appropriate cell type to use. And finally, they're found systemically. Because they're in the bloodstream, they're all over the body, which sort of reflects the systemic nature of the symptoms of the disease. In terms of our patient cohort, we split our cohort into two separate groups. So we've got the moderately affected cohort who were able to attend the Cresta clinic and have their bloods taken at the end of appointments, and a severely affected cohort. So these patients were either housebound or bedbound by the disease and required us to go to them in order to collect blood samples. So the work we did used a technique called extracellular flux analysis, using what's known as the seahorse machine, despite having absolutely no links to marine life whatsoever. So this machine basically allows us to look at both mitochondrial respiration and glycolysis in the same cells. It works by measuring either oxygen in the media surrounding the cells, and this tells us about mitochondrial respiration, because when cells undergo mitochondrial respiration, they consume oxygen. So by measuring the oxygen that's being consumed by the cells, we can use this as a marker of mitochondrial function. Or if we're wanting to look at glycolysis, we measure protons or hydrogen ions in the extracellular medium, and this tells us about the glycolytic rate, because glycolysis produces protons which are pumped into the extracellular medium by the cells. So we can use this machine to look at essentially the majority of energy production within the cells. I'm going to start by going through how we looked at mitochondrial respiration. So just to talk about mitochondria slightly more in depth, the figure on your left shows the mitochondrial respiratory chain. So this is a series of 5 protein complexes which use electron gradients to ultimately generate the ATP that we need for cellular processes. So the 5th complex is the one that actually produces the ATP, but we need all the complexes in working order in order to get to that final stage. And for these experiments, what we do is serially inject different compounds in order to manipulate the mitochondria so we can calculate different aspects of the mitochondrial functioning. And these are all shown in the graph on the right, which is the output we get from these experiments. And out of these parameters, the 4 that we deem the most important are the basal respiration, because this shows the respiration rate of the cells before it's been manipulated, before an artificial environment is being created with the addition of compounds. It shows how the cells are performing under rest conditions. Also the ATP production, because ultimately that's what we're interested in, is are the cells producing enough energy. And the maximal respiration, because it shows the maximal potential capacity of the cells to respire. So it's how high can they go when they're put under stress, such as when the body comes under stress, like fighting an infection, can the cells increase their respiration rate to battle the infection? And the difference between the maximal respiration and the basal respiration is the reserve capacity. So this shows us how much the cells hold in reserve in order to, for example, fight infection, or when they come under other cellular stresses that require higher levels of ATP. So in terms of mitochondrial function, the first aim we wanted to do was just compare the 3 cohorts. How do the mitochondria function as a whole in the healthy controls and moderately and severely affected cohorts? So what I've got up here is the 4 different parameters I talked about. The healthy controls are on the left-hand side of each graph, then the moderately affected patients are the severely affected patients. And what we found was that in both the moderately and severely affected cohorts, an impairment in mitochondrial function in terms of all 4 of the parameters. So this showed us that the mitochondrial function seemed to be lower, therefore the cells weren't producing as much energy in the patients as in the controls. And importantly, we found no significant differences between the moderately and severely affected cohorts. So the energy production didn't appear to correlate at all with disease severity. So this is quite important because deconditioning is talked about a lot in terms of ME/CFS and other fatigue diseases, because patients, obviously, because of their fatigue, they've got to restrict activity levels, and this then has consequences in terms of mitochondria and the mitochondrial number, and therefore it's sort of a catch-22. What's coming first? Is it the lack of mitochondria that's causing the fatigue, or is it the fatigue that's causing the lack of mitochondria? And the fact that there's no difference between the moderately affected cohort, who are able to move around and are not restricted to sort of their own homes, and those who are housebound or bedbound by the disease, and so the difference in activity levels between them 2 groups, if this result were due to deconditioning, we would expect the severely affected patients to have even lower mitochondrial function than those moderately affected by the disease. So what this suggests is that this is a reflection of the disease rather than the deconditioning caused by the disease. So the take-home message from this is the mitochondria seem to be the mitochondrial impairment in ME/CFS regardless of disease severity. In order to try and look into that further and see exactly where this impairment lies, we want to look at the complexes themselves and look at the activity of individual complexes to see if it's these complexes themselves that are causing the lack of ATP production or energy production from the cells. So I'm not going to go through what state 3, state 4 and RCR are, but they're different parameters of energy production. They're different states of energy production that are essentially within the cells. So what we did was look at complex 1, complex 2 and complex 4 activity. And what we found was no significant differences between the healthy controls and the ME/CFS cohort. And when we separated out the ME/CFS cohort into disease severity, there were still no differences. So this suggests to us that while there's a mitochondrial impairment, it's not the mitochondrial complexes themselves that's causing this impairment. When we're giving them the same substrates at the same concentrations under the same conditions, they seem to be functioning normally, which suggests that something further upstream that's causing the mitochondrial dysfunction. And this work has also been validated by another group using a different technique, and they've shown the same thing. So we've gone through mitochondrial respiration, so now we're going to look at glycolysis. glycolysis. And like I said before, what we measure here is protons around in the media surrounding the cells. And what we expected to see in this experiment was that the glycolytic function of the ME/CFS cells would be significantly higher than the healthy controls. So we thought because the cells aren't producing as much energy from the mitochondrial respiration, they would have to be compensating for this somehow in some meaningful way. So naturally we assumed it would be via glycolysis, the other major energy production pathway of the cells. But that wasn't what we found. What we found was comparable levels of glycolytic functioning between all three groups. So not only were the cells producing lower levels of ATP and lower energy from the mitochondria, but they weren't compensating for this in any meaningful way. So this is important, one, because it shows there's an overall lack of energy production from cells, and also because it shows the glycolytic pathways appear to be functioning normally. So having shown that it appears to be somewhere upstream of the mitochondrial complexes, we're also suggesting it's downstream of the glycolytic pathway, which sounds simple but still leaves a huge array of pathways in the middle. And that is a very important point that I do want to make, is that I talk a lot about mitochondrial impairment and mitochondria not producing enough energy, but it's important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean the mitochondria themselves are the problem or causing the fatigue in patients. It's very easy to then go, okay, maybe this is a mitochondrial disease and we need to look at it from that point of view. But there's so many pathways upstream of the mitochondria. It could be to do with substrate movement into cells, to do with enzymatic activity at any point along these pathways, that the mitochondria may be dysregulated, but we don't want to make any bold claims just from the studies that we've done. So what I've shown is that the ME/CFS cells produce less energy in the form of ATP than healthy controls, and this is because the mitochondrial function is lower and they're not compensating by using glycolysis to produce ATP. And the low reserve capacity that we showed in the mitochondria suggests that when cells come under stress, they're unable to increase their cellular energy to account for the increase in stress, and this leaves cells unable to fulfill their energy demands. And these results suggest that ME/CFS may be a hypermetabolic state where cells are not performing to the same metabolic ability as healthy controls. Although, as with a lot of fatigue studies, whether these are a cause or a consequence of the disease is very difficult to determine with these types of experiments. So just in terms of where we want to go next with this work, we want to set this in terms of fatigue as a whole. So what we've shown, is this a marker of ME/CFS, or can this be seen in other fatigue groups, in other diseases such as Sjogren's or rheumatoid arthritis? What sort of profile do those patients show in terms of the mitochondrial function? We need to look more into the deconditioning, and we also want to collect longitudinal samples, so samples from the same patients throughout a long period of time, to see how the mitochondrial function is affected by fatigue levels, activity levels, diet, in the days preceding the blood sample collection, so we can get a true interaction of, is it the fatigue causing the mitochondrial problems or the mitochondria causing the fatigue? So I just want to finish by thanking all the people who funded the studies and everybody who was involved in the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Cara, that was fascinating. So we're now going to move on to the workshop part of the event, and I'm delighted to introduce Justine Smith, who is a Senior Strategic Manager for the National Institute for Health Research Clinical Research Network, North East North Cumbria. And Justine has also been really instrumental in helping to shape the event today. She's just getting mic'd up and will be able to join us on stage.
Right, I think I'm ready. Yes, I can hear myself. So, I'm not going to talk at you this afternoon. We're going to do some work on your tables because I want to hear from you now. That's why we got you all here, to hear about the amazing research that's going on, but also I want to hear from you what is important to you, what research should we be doing, and what is fatigue like for you, so that we can collect this information and share it as wide as we can. So Stuart showed you that big network that we have access to people across the whole of England and working out in